Hello, dear friends. Today in our studio, we have a guest whom I greatly respect, Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, I would like to bring up the topic of the upcoming cataclysms. It is obvious that they already take place, and they increase with a shocking frequency. The world is on the verge of global cataclysms, yet what makes the societies live? What do people in the world live by when cataclysms occur?
Well, people. People live by the things they have lived before. The only ones who are affected by this are people who get into the epicenter of these cataclysms. These people have problems. They are in trouble. They need help. But, unfortunately, today's world is unprepared. This is true. The world is not ready to help those who suffer. Let's say, we have seen that the aid comes too late, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. This is caused, first and foremost, by people's intolerance towards each other. Unfortunately, nowadays, a consumer society is actively cultivated because economy is at the head. In any country, it's clear that private interest of certain people, groups of people, and states as a whole takes place as well. While states, unfortunately, are not communities of people who live in a given area, but a state is a certain group of people that rules a given country. That's how it is. It's really so. And those people have totally different interests. Yes, people are concerned. They think, the elites, they think globally in order to develop economy, even to make people's life better, to increase their salaries. It's necessary to make consumption grow. So, they have cultivated a consumer society. And what does consumption affect? First of all, selfishness, arrogance, envy, and so on. It means if you have some fashionable clothes, I like them, and I also need to buy them. Having looked at your earrings, I also want them. I'm just exaggerating. That's the principle of consumption, meaning it's sort of a secret advertisement and open advertisement as well, and everything else. However, in this race for the economic wealth, unfortunately, the most important thing has been forgotten: humaneness. People have become intolerant to each other. We observe this nowadays. In this period, we observe this, and even earlier, when the trouble began, right? Only several millions of people had to migrate to Europe, and that practically led to a collapse of Europe. Those were only several millions. Whereas in fact, and this is not a secret anymore, it may already be mentioned that in the nearest years, at least several billion people will undergo migration. And what will happen then?
Indeed, what you are talking about is really taking place. In 2014, Alatra science researchers published a report in which the global cataclysms were clearly described. Less than 2 years passed, and the events are unfolding with such an incredible speed on such a scale.
The events are happening in accordance with the report. I'm familiar with this report. Fortunately, it was published. Thank God. In a brief version. Because, first of all, people should not be frightened. People should live peacefully. Yet, at the same time, they should be warned. Indeed, the situation is getting worse in climatology and in other things. But that doesn't matter. The worst thing is that relations between people get aggravated. A little earlier, we have mentioned mutual intolerance and so on. Banal selfishness. This is what prevails in people, and this affects everything. This affects society. This affects families. This affects literally all of humanity. It's a problem, of course. It shouldn't be like this. It should be otherwise. People should respect each other at least. If not love, then at least respect. They should understand that another person has the same blood as them, regardless of nationality or anything else. He's also a human. And in fact, if people were able to realize this nowadays, they would be more humane. And there wouldn't be such problems as in Europe. However, here, not only Europeans are to blame. The blame is mutual of both immigrants and the host party. This is due to the fact that both parties are ill-mannered, just in a literal sense. They come to another culture with their habits, with their culture. They as if set themselves free and consider they can do anything they want. They come and think that everyone owes them. This is wrong too. If a person is accustomed to living by certain principles, He feels discomfort, even if there is a little interference. And what does discomfort cause? Indignation, right? Naturally. Hatred is easily provoked in this case. We saw more than once. We observed what happened to those poor people who had endured a lot. But they also suffered because some of them behaved badly. Not everyone, I emphasize, but only some of them. They roughhoused, committed crimes, and did many other things. Such few people caused resentment among the local population. There were tough conflicts, and in fact, with quite severe consequences. This is wrong. This happens because the point of upbringing is missed. Literally. In our world, it is made fashionable to be rich, or at least pretend to be rich. It means you are worth something. However, it's not fashionable to be a human, just a simple, kind, good person. This omission is very serious. That is, it would be good if the vector has changed a little bit, but this depends on people themselves. It's not worth counting on elites, on states, or... What are states? States are people. Like we say, it's the elite. What is the elite? It's also people. Most of them are greatly disappointed people. Why? When they were striving to get the power, to become richer, they had plans, and it seemed to them, I'll become rich and everything will change. However, when they came there, nothing changed. Their problems didn't disappear, only headache added. Thus, they want to get much richer, much more bossy, and they fight for that all the time. They don't have peace. They are really unhappy people. Why? Because any person feels inside what is true and what is not, no matter what consciousness tells him about it, and how it postpones everything until later, saying that in the nearest future something will change, and everything will be fine. Inwardly, a person feels and understands that everything is a fairy tale, but again, he gives in to the tricks of his consciousness, for it is better to believe in an illusion, right? That's exactly how people act. They believe in an illusion. They act contrary to their conscience, contrary to honor and everything humane in themselves, in order to be as everybody, in order to be above and to rule everyone. That's also a trouble. So, it's not worth counting on those people who are just as unhappy as all the rest. I think a solution to this problem for people is that people should arrange everything for themselves. They should unite. There should be unity of all people. And people should demand from those very mass media. No advertising, no evil. After all, in our society, evil is being propagandized everywhere. Whatever we switch on, we see violence or something else, meaning buy and be afraid. Such a tendency. Perhaps we should change the rhetoric. Who is actually the consumer of these products, first of all? People, right? If we don't want to consume this product, and if everyone joins us, the market will dictate its own. They will have to give us the product we need, right?
Right.
Otherwise, no one will take it. So who is guilty? We are.
So people are not able or just afraid to unite. What is this? Or they don't know how to do it, do they?
A lot of people don't believe in this.
They just don't believe.
Many don't believe. Many are afraid. These are again imposed patterns. Again, we talk about the imposed patterns, and this is really so. These patterns are artificially imposed on people in order to make them consume more, think less about themselves as humans, but think more about themselves as consumers, right? So that they fight for survival, try to climb others' heads in order to be higher than others. That is such a standard of living. We understand that a human is dual, and we are approaching this topic a little. In a human, there is a material component and a spiritual component, as they say. The material component is mortal. It gets ill, it suffers, it envies. It's exactly the manifestation of superior egoism, or pridefulness, so to say, of the most frightful sin that can be, which turns a human into an animal. And the question is, what prevails in a person? If spirituality prevails in a person, at least a little bit, then he can realize and understand what is good and what is bad. That it is bad to be an animal, because whatever you achieved during life, all this is empty. Indeed, whatever you acquire, you won't possess it. Everything is finite, and everything comes to an end. It ends much faster than you want. Moreover, in today's climatic situation, let's put it mildly, It's better for people to actually be people in order to offer each other a helping hand. Here, there is also another. I'm telling this to people who live by consciousness and are more subjected to earthly passions than to spiritual things. It's beneficial. It seems that this will not affect us, that disasters happen there. Today, they happen there, but tomorrow, they will be at your home. Will your neighbor help you? Of course he won't, if he is like you, right? So, what should you do? First of all, you should lend a hand of friendship to your neighbor. Look into each other's eyes. Just sit and look and think. Sometimes, even words are not needed to understand that we have the same blood, right? And then you will be sorry for the neighbor if he gets into trouble. And when you are ready to help your neighbor, this will mean the neighbor will be able to help you as well. If a trouble comes to your home, however, unless you are ready to help your neighbor, don't wait for his help. He's just like you. He lives in the same conditions, right?
Right. Indeed, the pattern of behavior at the moments when there are some disasters, cataclysms, when answering the question, what do you imagine, how it will happen, people imagine only one option, some chaos, lawlessness. It seems like they don't have a different scenario in their consciousness.
Of course they don't. Let's watch disaster movies. What is the scenario? Everything collapses. Everyone dies. Only several people survive, right? Again, who survives? The elite and those whom the elite needs, while everyone else is in chaos. Here, many people feel themselves doomed, whereas others who are smarter strive either to become the elite or at least to be needed by elite. You see? What does this urge inspire people to? To spiritual search, to humaneness, to unity, or something else? And how can there be unity if everything collapses? That's how they perceive it.
So, a model is offered where you will survive if you are closer to the elite.
If not the elite, then at least an integral part of it, a servant, right?
Then you will be able to get saved.
Well, at least you'll have a certain chance.
But again, to get saved, yes? We clearly understand that a human is mortal and there is no person yet who...
But consciousness says something else, doesn't it?
Yes, that he will live forever.
Of course. It doesn't actually say that you will die today or tomorrow. It tells that you will live a long time. That's the phenomenon of consciousness. It's the most terrible liar possible. And it's hard for a person to realize and understand this because how come consciousness is me? Just to separate oneself and consciousness. Yet, we'll talk about this a little bit later.
I'd like to talk on the topic of spirituality, that our society won't be able to survive today during the period of disasters without spiritual and moral foundations. What do people generally understand by such a concept as spirituality?
In the majority, people understand that spirituality means to visit a temple. Moreover, you should do this publicly so that everyone sees you without fail and considers you a spiritual person. Well, depending on religion, to perform some kind of prayerful action there. This is what spirituality ends with. There is also another mandatory point. Everyone recalls that they are spiritual, that they are God's children, and that God owes them. When something happens to them, I'm not taking anything large and global. Then all the more. His belly got sick. Lord, why? Because he ate something wrong. He should go to a doctor instead of bothering God's head with his sick belly. Isn't that so? And he should be more careful when choosing food.
There is such a point. Will people be able to consolidate together in an area, not to mention the planet, region, or some continent, but can they consolidate just among themselves in commonplace relationships, simply in a family?
Today, the trouble is not only in society, but even in family units. Let's look at the number of divorces. This is really a disaster. Moreover, we don't take our country. We take the world. This problem is everywhere. Why? Again, we come to the consumer society, the highest degree of human egoism, human pridefulness, and intolerance. For as long as people are dating and going to get married, they give way to one another. Hormones are burning in them, and so on. However, the fairy tale ends with the wedding, and then life begins. And here, precisely, problems arise. If a person isn't ready, let's say, to yield, to compromise, then conflicts surely begin. without fail. While conflicts are clashes, it's an emergence of hatred and intolerance to each other. And here, the points of responsibility arise. If there are children, it's a restraining factor. Yet nowadays, even children often don't influence, let's say, the decision of spouses to part company. Well, oftentimes, they can also tolerate each other in sort of an unspoken agreement. Someone earns while someone cares for him. It's like a servant and a master. Yet, if we look at how the world is structured and how matter is arranged, then everything falls into place. As a matter of fact, any matter tries to dominate another matter. If we look at how animals live, that is, strong ones dictate to the weak, a weak one serves a strong, and he obeys. The same instincts work in people as well, both in a family unit and everywhere. And here, without spirituality, problems arise. I would also like to touch upon the following subject. Many blame different religions, sects, or something else. A person got into a sect, they parted company. And religion is sort of guilty because the person started believing in God. He decided to divorce me, or she decided to leave me. Yet, what actually happens if we look far and wide? There also happens the following. A person goes to religion not in order to comprehend the spiritual world, meaning to somehow get closer to God, indeed, but something attracts him. A new company, some interests, or something else. He listens to everything, comes home and starts teaching. So, there goes teaching. Let's say, by a person who doesn't have knowledge, who has no personal experience. Naturally, it's like a form of manipulation. Thus, a person receives certain tools in order to help his neighbors, as some people say. For they are mistaken. I know where I should go. I go to God. Well, people don't know. These are my relatives and friends, and I want to help them. And the first rule is violated. While the first rule exactly says, if we look at all religions, it's not prescribed, but it exists. It's the freedom of choice. That is, no matter what kind of relative he is for you, close, beloved, sweetheart, he's a human, and he is free. And he's entitled to take the decision he likes, right? If you like some religion, go ahead, be in it, but respect the other person. After all, we know that we even have so many common acquaintances. These are people who, let's say, are in one family, but profess different religions. And they live well and respect each other. Why? Because these people are spiritually more developed indeed. And this is what gives spiritual development in any religion, in principle. Here I will digress from the topic a little. What does religion give? First and foremost, it gives an opportunity for a person to come to God, right?
Right.
Everyone has their own ways. The path is actually one, but the tools are different. And so, having received these tools, if a person truly executes something and really aspires, he will definitely come where he wants. I mean, to God. And so, while developing on this path, what qualities does he gain? Respect for another person. He understands what predominates in his other half, so to say. And even if his other half behaves a bit inadequately, from his position, there are demons in him. He's on the animal side at the moment. Then, understanding it, you only want to help this person, right? Because he is suffering. So, will you impose your opinion on him? Of course not, won't you? Meaning, there is mutual understanding, mutual respect, elementary things that help to preserve the family. If there is a desire, however, if people have no desire, they will part company anyway. Most often, one more reason appears. When someone goes to some religion, suddenly, for no apparent reason, begins to get involved in it, spends a lot of time there, and devotes a little time to his partner, right?
Consumerism.
Consumer attitude to each other. He went there. He's engaged in his spiritual growth. While here, pardon me, snotty kids run around and that's it. There's already a quarrel, already a scandal. I've got a little time devoted to me. Kids are snotty, while you are engaged in spiritual growth. What kind of spiritual are you, right? And so it begins. One hard word brings another, as always. Hit on the head with a saucepan or something else, and they part company. And then, who is guilty? Religion. So who is guilty?
Of course, the person himself.
Of course, the person himself. This is exactly what a person should get rid of, first and foremost, right?
To learn to live in respect and in love for each other.
Certainly.
In the true spiritual meaning of this word.
Thus, starting from the smallest, elementary family unit, and ending with society globally. If fights take place in the world, and this is encouraged, let's take, as we often see, for instance, football fans scuffled with these ones or those ones, confrontation. In what civilized society is it acceptable that people beat up each other? Based on some fanaticism, on some kind of disrespect or something else, is this normal? They write and talk about this, they laugh at it, and it is sort of perceived as normal. Any aggression of one person against another must be condemned by society. Isn't that right?
Undoubtedly.
And any aggression must be stopped. And the aggressor must be what? He must be isolated from society, at least for re-education, at the minimum. That's when it's a civilized society. Then we can walk in the street at ease, right?
Right.
And what do we need? What does any person want in this world? Once we have already touched upon these subjects in one of the programs, what does a person need in this world? First of all, I don't take spiritual search, I take the material life.
You know, everything is narrowed down to one's comfort zone, some kind of comfort.
Absolutely right.
Satisfaction of the needs of one's ego.
But this comfort is first and foremost. But this is secondary. In the first place, there is safety.
Safety.
It's first and foremost. And then all egoism begins, right? While safety is again what? Mutual respect for each other. When a person doesn't rob another, right? That is intolerable in society. It's not encouraged by society. It is punished without fail. And not in such a way that one stole from the other and everyone laughed. A thief stole a stick from a thief, sort of.
People don't trust each other.
Distrust arises in oneself, first and foremost. What is the reason for distrust? Let's start with this, because you yourself don't trust anyone, isn't it so?
It is.
Right. And why do you not trust other people? Because you don't trust yourself, first of all. You see, any person is well aware that there is something wrong in him. If he ponders, begins to think, but when he faces the moments of self-awareness or self-knowledge, so to speak, and in fact, everyone passes it, regardless of religion. When a person is on the spiritual path, we've again returned to religion. When a person is on the spiritual path, in spiritual search, he certainly faces self-analysis and introspection. And no matter what it is called, whether it's mind, consciousness, intelligence, personality, okay? For us, the concept of personality is closer, meaning that which is separated, so to say, from the mind, but it is right near. Well, everyone says, don't give attention to your mind. Don't give attention to thoughts. Why? Meaning, save your attention. This is mentioned in all religions. It is in Islam, it's in Christianity, and there are a lot of great people who are really great because they achieved something, and they talked about it. Thus, don't pay attention to bad thoughts. It appears that attention is power, right? Right. In this regard, the book Alatra is written very well. This is not to advertise Alatra, but simply to explain. Why? Again, I just want to mention many people call Alatra a religion, a sect, or something else. Alatra cannot be a religion, because what is said in Alatra is contained in any religion. Whatever religion we take, if we cast away the sand that people have panned, only the knowledge of Alatra remains, right? Many things are no longer there. A lot has disappeared. Many things were told to people by the prophets at that time in such a way that people could understand. But if we compare, these are basically the same synonyms of what is described in Alatra. The trouble is that people can understand this only when they have evolved spiritually. After all, much in that very Christianity, in that very Islam or Buddhism, no matter what we take, people skip past them. Why? Because they don't understand the essence of certain words, of certain things. Here, a problem exactly arises, that people who have comprehended something spiritually, and there were a lot of them in fact, they described, they told about their experience. However, they tried to put their perception through feelings into words. They tried to explain that world to people here in some way. Of course, there was complication of those things. And it is possible to understand this only by perceiving it oneself. Otherwise, if you read these are just words for you. In Christianity, there is an interesting saint, Silouan the Athonite.
The Athonite.
Do you know?
Yes, sure.
He told about the inverted pyramid, and the apex of the inverted pyramid was precisely Christ. And so, an ascetic, a seeker who followed the spiritual path, had to delve to the very top of the pyramid to get to Jesus, to go deeper in order to learn this truth. This is really matching. If we put conventionalities away and fit it on the one who follows the spiritual path, just put away images and take this as an association, then it's really in such a way. He put his experience into words. This is interesting. Yet, who can understand it? Only the one who has this experience, right? Even at that time, there were concepts and comparisons, just the same as those cited and described in the book Alatra, right? However, in Alatra, it is told in modern language for a modern human in a simplified understanding. Of course, let's say in a concise understanding, but it is given enough to understand. Why am I saying this? At that time, even Silouan talked about this too. He also gave these associations. It's difficult to tell otherwise, but a person who is, let's say, as we began to talk, a consumer brought up in the modern community, what will he tell you? Or rather, how will he understand this? Not what he will tell, but how will he understand it?
Indeed, he doesn't know another dimension except this one.
What is the inverted pyramid? Why should I take care about everyone? And even regarding the attitude to God, what is actually people's attitude to God nowadays? Even, let's say, those who call themselves believers. When they come to God, internally, they consider that since they are here, since God has sent them here, hence He already owes to them. You see? They have some assets already. Thus, God is obliged to restore his health, to rebuild his life, and so on. Isn't that so?
Yes, it's enough to address him once a year,
Of course.
a month,
Well, at best.
or on major holidays.
And to ask for something material, right? For health, for a family, for everything to be good. While this actually relates to material. And those saints who really comprehended, they actually said, one mustn't ask God for anything but salvation of the soul. After all, in fact, regardless of religion, people who have comprehended said the same. Why? Let's face the truth. Religion doesn't save, but God saves, right?
Right.
But only when a person makes an effort, when he's engaged in self-development, spiritual self-development, when he's learning this process. If we take, for example, Muhammad's life, Islam, right? After all, those who lived in his time were surprised, and many people described this. Today, there are sources where we can read about this for those who want. He actually devoted a lot of time to prayer, not an ordinary prayer, but a deep one. He attained deep perception through feelings. Why? Because, again, the person aspired to be there. And he showed by his personal example how to achieve it. But again, after perception through feelings, he began to shape all this in words, through the mind, through intellect. Who can understand this?
Only the one who is able to feel this, to get in contact with this.
Absolutely right. Or the one who at least strives for it, right? Who has an aspiration. He thinks at least a little bit, not with the brain, pardon me for the expression, but with the soul, right? No, it's not right. A person cannot think with the soul. There is personality and the like, but this is a figurative expression. We let it through the soul. It will be more clear this way. Since we have touched upon the topic of Silouan, here I believe it would be appropriate to mention the process of his spiritual formation. If you remember, he told, I know that you read, that's why I say so, if you remember. When he told about the earthquake that took place during the service, and the most striking what impressed him. After all, at that time, But he was surprised that during the earthquake, his brothers, when the building in which they stayed, let's say, was really shuddering, even stones were falling down as he describes. He got frightened, and he started thinking that it would be better to go out. But he saw the Father Superior next to him, who didn't change a bit, continuing his prayer, and brothers also stayed. As he claimed, only 6 people went out, being frightened. He stayed, realizing that when a person is in God, he has nothing to be afraid of. And that really gave him an impetus, an understanding. He described this not without reason. Why? Because he understood what it means to be in God, and what it means not to be afraid. When a person is in the state of, let's say, communication with the spiritual world or with God, whatever name is more suitable for you, he realizes that the body is mortal. It can die anyway. And he cherishes even this small, even a short period of communication with the spiritual world or with God. And he values this much more than material life. And this important, crucial moment which Silouan had experienced exactly made him the one whom he became later on. And from his later descriptions, if we touch upon them, it is interesting when he writes already about the fact that there should be no thoughts in prayer. Not only words, but there mustn't even be thoughts. You shouldn't cling to anything at all, even to good thoughts. As a matter of fact, a thought that comes during prayer, while prayer in this case was already a spiritual practice for him, not just a set of words that a person repeats as a mantra in a hope to get something, but it's already a process of communication with the spiritual world. And any thought that appears, even if it's good, it distracts and it attracts attention. It's about investment of one's attention.
It strengthens the position.
Absolutely right. Whose position does it strengthen? That of consciousness. And thoughts really begin to attack a person, and he loses the prayer. And at the first stage of cognition of the spiritual world, it can be extremely difficult for people to return to this state of feelings, which they have gained. Subsequently, of course, when a person develops, he just doesn't allow distraction for any thoughts, pictures in the head, or anything else. And Silouan described this experience in a really interesting way. Regarding this experience through feelings, we again go back to Muhammad. Muhammad mentioned this. All religions talk exactly about perception of the spiritual world through feelings, about the value of this contact and its retention. And many people wonder how to retain this attention. And here again, a question arises.
To retain.
What does it mean to retain attention? How can a person retain attention on the spiritual world, this perception through feelings? There is actually a contradiction in these words themselves. And this means there is a contradiction and incomprehension of this process by a person. So, a person goes in circles. He tries and feels that this is something, but cannot comprehend. Why? Because he tries to comprehend with the mind, and it's impossible to comprehend it with the mind. We have mentioned practices, prayers that Muhammad performed, right? That several times a day and in the nighttime, as his contemporaries describe, a third of the night he devoted exactly to the prayer, exactly to these deepest states of feelings. Why? Because when comprehending these very subtleties of communication with the spiritual world, a person doesn't want to go away from there. Why? There is the real, there is life, there is the truth. When returning to this world, so to say, a person faces the realities of his consciousness. He doesn't face the realities of this world. He faces the realities of illusions, which his consciousness offers him. It's a more correct wording. After all, for better understanding, we can touch upon the experience of modern neurophysiologists, okay? And what will we come to? To an understanding that our mind plays evil tricks with us, what we call the mind, consciousness.
For some reason, people totally rely on the brain in their life.
Rather, unconsciousness.
Consciousness.
Let's say, brain has nothing to do with this. Brain is just a functional organ. Consciousness.
Yes, consciousness.
Right. And consciousness actually forms our personality, as psychologists say, doesn't it? That which we nurture in ourselves. And we nurture it on our own, by our choice. What do we choose? We actually have many examples in our life, even in childhood, but we emphasize and memorize some of them. We imitate somebody, and this way we develop. What is actually behind that? Let's just parse what consciousness is and what personality is. We have touched on an interesting subject. Although much has been said and written on it, there is also Alatra. There are many other sources, and there were many saints who touched upon this subject. It is really interesting.
Once I was impressed with the research of scientists, which claims that the brain tells us in advance what to do. Moreover, it says that we have taken this decision ourselves. So you understand that it's just a performance being shown.
A performance.
Plenty of roles will be played, so that you only...
Consciousness plays a performance for you. And here you've noted, while many people unfortunately don't understand who you is, who they are, you see, it is oneself. For whom is the performance played? A person is always not just a spectator, but a participant, an integral part. Consciousness functions identically in all people. Someone has it more developed and stuffed with various knowledge, someone less, but the scenario, the pattern is the same. A human doesn't think with words. A human thinks with pictures and actions in the depth. Later, on the bigger scale, that switches to some words, images, and everything else. By and large, a person doesn't even choose words when he speaks. He tries to find some words. Anyone can ponder. How does he speak? What does he think about? Where does a thought appear from, and how does it come? It's the work of consciousness. It's experience and practice. It is sort of comprehension, the process of education, self-education, self-development, or development. Doesn't matter. It's an accumulated stock of certain knowledge. And I'm guided by it. If I don't know some word, I won't use it. This is really so. Yet, where do words come from? And how are they formed? The words which another person perceives, which we perceive. How in our consciousness? Consciousness plays a whole performance for us. It often happens that some situation which we experienced in childhood is continuously played for us, especially situations that affect us emotionally. A situation continues to irritate us, so to say, to amaze, or something else, to provoke emotions. And people often go back to the situations which have passed.
endlessly.
Absolutely right. Endlessly, replaying, worrying. What happens and why? Now, we will switch a little bit, so to say. Let it be some metaphysics, okay? Whoever likes what. But if we analyze this process, let's say not only from the perspective of neurophysiology, because it's boring. An impulse goes, it has worked, a neuron got excited, that's ridiculous. Chemical and physical processes that occur are the consequence of those invisible processes which represent, let's say, a superstructure over our consciousness. I would compare our consciousness to a stage that we contemplate, while the one who contemplates is actually personality. I'll digress from the topic a little bit. Spiritual practice or prayer should exactly be performed by the one who contemplates, by the viewer, but without these actors on the stage. That's when everything passes very fast, and that's when a person really comprehends the spiritual world. Well, now let's go back to the process of our theatricality, so to say. Far and wide, we observe 2 or even 3 people arguing in our consciousness. Consciousness can generate anything, any scenes, and we assign a role to ourselves. Question: are we really the ones who assign a role to ourselves? Who assigns it? It's actually consciousness that assigns it. And the most interesting thing is that even in this argument, it has assigned us a role of the viewer, what we need to do, and where we should put our attention. It's not interested in anything else. Consciousness is interested in where and how we invest our attention, with what power, and how long it retains our attention. Nothing else is interesting for it. And the more attention we invest in these illusory pictures displayed in our cranium, the farther we are from God. This is the paradox of life, so to say. and it seems to us that we live since we think and communicate. For instance, we focus on resolving some issue, or we face some emotional situation, or we are preparing for a meeting with someone and begin to imagine, to discuss that which doesn't exist. Of course, we do planning, but people just don't understand that it's a written scenario. Let's put it simply for them. While the stage director, here's the most interesting point. We have mentioned the director.
The director.
Right, we can call it the system. It's easier this way. Yes, it's a whole system, a part of which, like a mycelium, is our consciousness. Or we can call it the devil. So the director is actually the devil, and our consciousness is a demon. Or, since there are a lot of them there, we can call them demons. However, thanks to our consciousness, we communicate in this three-dimensional world. We explore it and so on. Thank God, now we can call things by their proper name. Why? Because physics has developed a little bit. People have become more literate. They understand perfectly well that even the three-dimensional world isn't an exception. So to say, many physicists, let's say, have already comprehended. They actually understand and realize that there can be a lot of such three-dimensional worlds like our universe, an infinite number of them. You see? And our universe is just one of small manifestations. There are very interesting works in this field. When inquisitive people, though by means of mind and self-analysis, self-study, perceive this at the level of feelings. Now, I'll digress from the topic a little. Why are major discoveries made by those who are able to feel? Yet, they feel something different. They don't go to God, but invest this perception through feelings, the power of their attention, in the material world. Naturally, everything turns out differently for them here, doesn't it? These are great scientists who see various tables of chemical elements in their dreams, who make great discoveries that later affect the development of entire humanity. However, this is also a scenario.
Does it mean they're excellent students in the system?
Yes, exactly.
But in the spiritual?
Absolutely right. It means that people waste their lives on turning into dust. This has been mentioned and is now being mentioned everywhere. There is nothing, let's say, new here. So, it turns out that our consciousness has planned everything for us in advance. And some people praise consciousness and consider it sort of a king. Yes, they think that consciousness is a king. Then it turns out that we are the slaves of this king, we as personality. The one who are we? In the meaning of who is, what is personality? Personality is exactly what may become, or rather, attain life eternal, which is described as well. Although many people are being sarcastic about that, meaning immortality, eternal life. They consider themselves atheists, not even understanding who inside of them makes them believe that they are atheists. It turns out that these are adherents as well, adherents of the religion of consciousness, or the religion of Satan. For instance, many people say that there are a lot of Satanists. Indeed, there are lots of them. Why? Because even those who consider themselves believers actually serve consciousness more. They even treat their religions not as spiritual tools, but in a consumerist manner. Again, we go back to the consumer society. It turns out that everything is mixed up and messed up in our world. And then, naturally, people start asking questions. How can I retain my attention on perception of the spiritual world through feelings?
Well, yes, indeed.
It's a paradox. It excludes itself. Why isn't it possible to comprehend the spiritual world through consciousness? Again, that very Silouan. We've said that one mustn't emit even a single thought in prayers. It's necessary to perceive through feelings. And here, the paradox, let's say, ceases to be a paradox as such. Why? Because the one who observes in our theater of life, in the inner theater, I mean our personality, it cannot think. It perceives, it lives. While thoughts are imprints that originate from consciousness, they are determined beforehand, in advance, and so on. And it's also interesting that even among people, when two people quarrel or argue about something, the outcome of their argument is predetermined.
Both adherents of consciousness.
Absolutely right. Both of them are adherents of consciousness.
Even if they silently take somebody's side.
Moreover, it's interesting. I heard such a phrase, somebody took offense, abidelsia, at someone, or I'm offended, and it is said quite emotionally. Yet, few people know etymology, that the ending, sia, in Slavic languages means oneself. Right. That is, one has offended oneself. If you took offense at someone, then you, first of all, offended yourself. And we can go back to a family unit again. Why do rows and divorces happen? Because one person took offense at the other. It turns out that he offended himself. He just thought up all this. He even didn't think up. He put his attention into those thoughts which were proposed by whom? By consciousness. Thus, his king, his consciousness, his majesty, actually told him that he needed to get offended or put the power of his attention into this situation, into the thoughts that someone thinks badly of him, speaks badly, and so on. And that's it. A person is sulky. He's emotionally angry already. Can he come to a spiritual understanding? Of course not.
It's interesting regarding offended oneself. It's a very widespread pattern.
Of course.
And it is disguised with such a noble word as vulnerability. But this is pridefulness, isn't it?
It is disguised with pridefulness, yes.
Meaning, I'm perhaps a more moral person and I may judge someone.
This is one of the forms of manipulation. Again, what is a relationship of two material bodies? Someone rules by strength, someone by weakness. There is no difference. Someone uses physical strength, while someone applies cunning. Right? Everyone. But this is manipulation again. This again makes a person believe or think in some way. For example, I've taken offense at you. I need to evoke a certain emotion in you. You should start feeling bad.
A sense of guilt.
Yes, you should feel guilty, and you should come and ask me to forgive you, and I will think about it. Maybe. You see? Whereas, by and large, if we remove these actors from the stage, then we have nothing to divide. Everything is simple.
Ruled by consciousness.
Surely. Because, again, consciousness predominates, so we again return to people who try to make themselves feel by means of the power of attention. This is impossible. The simplest way, as I've said, for instance, we mentioned Silouan so many times today, that these great sacraments, as they say, should be done not through the mind, but through feelings. Although there is absolutely nothing secret here. Secret is in human minds. Consciousness talks about secrets and other things. Let's just look at the history of Allatra. Everything is described absolutely openly. Everything's available. It even has nothing to do with any religions or anything else. Certain meditative practices are described. It is clearly told what meditation is. Meditation is the same autogenic training, ordinary autogenic training. It's the work through consciousness with one's body. Or rather, it's the work of consciousness on one's body. Nothing other than that. What you focus your attention on is what happens, is what you provoke. A hand gets warm, a chakran begins to work, or something else. As a matter of fact, what is this? It is investment of the power of attention. You concentrate, rejecting other thoughts. You ignore all other thoughts, but you keep this one. Therefore, one hand is warmer, the other is colder. And this happens physically, indeed. Some capillaries become narrower, other become wider. Well, this is elementary. But this way, a person learns at least to reject some thoughts, to focus the power of his attention properly, and he gains the first experience of who he is. He is the one who can control thoughts. I would rather say not to control. This is wrong. It's more correct to say he's the one who can choose certain thoughts, where to invest the power of his attention. Right? That's right. Then, a couple of spiritual practices are described. What is spiritual practice? Spiritual practice is sort of a silent prayer, right? Thus, both prayer and spiritual practice is a process, I would say, of perception of the spiritual world through feelings. It doesn't contradict any religion. It is absolutely open and accessible. What should you do? Just practice. Explore yourself. Rule number 1. What should you study? You should study your consciousness, how it works, how stereotypical it is. You should observe other people. It's just a process of observation, and it's better to write all this down. What happens during the process of observation? A person sees typical patterns. He sees how predictably it all happens both with him and with another person, depending on a situation. In one situation, one thing happens. In another situation, another thing happens. Right? Right.
This is quite logical.
The system's patterns are absolutely logical. It is actually very poor in its diversity. It treats people in the same situations absolutely stereotypically, regardless of people's nationality or place of residence. While studying and observing this process, a person begins to understand that he doesn't need these thoughts, but they still come. He's not a master of these thoughts, and consciousness doesn't serve him. It endeavors to exploit him. Thus, he gradually begins to understand that he isn't consciousness, and that's where the initial experience is acquired. Right? Liberation through observation of consciousness. Study of the system, or as they say in Christianity, exposure of the devil. This is the initial experience. Then he begins to perceive other things, if there is a material world. Hence, there is the spiritual world. This is logical. It's even possible to understand and realize this by means of such tool as consciousness. Next, a person tries to evolve spiritually. At that, what is God? God is love. God isn't evil. Evil is this material world, while the spiritual world is endless, quiet, and blissful. It's difficult to describe it in words. But even when a person tries to feel it at least a little bit, he experiences an indescribable happiness which he can attain. And the more he practices, the more he learns. The happier he becomes. He doesn't become unsociable, as many people say. Look, here's a religious person.
Boring, spiritual.
Having a boring spiritual life. No, a person gains real freedom, the real one. I emphasize. And what is real freedom? It doesn't depend on the body. Where are your consciousness and your body? They are not yours anyway. We've already figured out that consciousness isn't yours. It's alien. Yes, you are responsible for its development, and you can develop it by investing the power of your attention in one or another field. But most often, it develops and exploits us. However, it develops us in its own direction, from a consumer perspective, so to say. It simply exploits us as personality. What is a body? A body is temporary clothing. It wears out, no matter what any of us would do. But again, let's take that very consciousness. For instance, if all people get together and apply every effort with their consciousness, will they be able to stop an earthquake?
No.
We started with cataclysms. Can people stop the future? That which is already happening and what will happen? They won't be able to.
By no means.
Definitely. Therefore, consciousness is limited. It is material and temporary. Everything goes to ruin. Everything wears out. And this planet, on which we are now, is merely a single instant. Generally speaking, I would say it's just a fleeting thought from the spiritual world's perspective. It's here, and it ceases to exist right away. Again, for us it seems big, when we measure it through consciousness. But if we look at it from the perspective of personality, this world becomes too transient, and time flows quickly, and all this fuss disappears because a person who is spiritually evolving gains freedom. Hence, this world ceases to be boring. I mean, this life isn't boring anymore. It becomes interesting, and in many aspects, it becomes fun, using such a slang word. Why? Because it's really funny to see how consciousness is bustling, trying to coax at least a little bit of attention out of personality. It's interesting, isn't it? Interesting.
It is.
No longer boring.
In the previous program, you said it does everything in order to keep a candidate for an angel in its house.
Naturally, this is its function, nothing more. Of course.
You know, when you live with the spiritual world, you realize that everything that takes place is actually a mere change of scenery.
Surely.
I would also like to say that when you used to live within the system, there was a clear understanding that everything was complicated, and some complex actions had to be taken, and plenty of books had to be read, and you had to surround yourself with spirituality.
Well, the human world is very complicated. When a person lives by the mind, he lives in sufferings. He lives in fear. He lives in numerous problems. But when a person lives a spiritual life, let's say, in unity with the spiritual world, even when he resides here. Everything becomes cheerful, wonderful, and amusing,
People as if
and not frightful at all.
not frightful at all, and people as if
And here's the most interesting point. I'll go back to Silouan. Thank God he understood this. We again return to the same situation when he was in the church and saw spiritually evolved people who weren't afraid. Only their body would die, but they wouldn't. And here a paradox arises. Consciousness starts manipulating and saying that every person gains some life after death and the like. Well, all fairy tales end after death, when a person becomes,
after.
well, now we have touched upon the state of subpersonality. But again, no matter how much we tell about this, a person won't understand that this is true unless he gains a spiritual experience. Otherwise, all this remains just a talk between two people for him. He will think, they are sitting and telling stories. But when a person is spiritually developing, at least a little bit, he understands what this is. Thank God, now we can already discuss such things, because our scientists, physicists, have got to the root of quantum states. Although, now, we speak of what is beyond the quantum limits, but this is already near, in fact. Well, at least it's already clear to many physicists. That is why, thank God, so many physicists come to our coordination center, because they begin to understand the essence of these processes. Why is this becoming clear for people who are indeed deeply engaged in neurophysiology? Because they understand that, well, how to put it?
We reached a deadlock.
There is no truth in matter, of course. They have experimentally learned what we are talking about, right? And Alatra has urged many people to this understanding owing to its simplicity. The funniest thing is that, again, many people who neither try to grasp the essence nor study it regard Alatra as religion or a competitor to religion. However, we do know, well, I don't know a single person who would abandon his or her religion so far. I attend the church myself.
Me too.
That's what I'm saying as
I
well.
can say that it has simplified understanding of the genuine orthodoxy.
It hasn't simplified, but rather has given understanding.
Yes, it has given understanding of the real
The
orthodoxy.
beauty of those religions and that truth which they are based upon. Again, what does consciousness do to people? Can a person who lives by the material world achieve the spiritual? No, I mean the one who lives an ordinary human life, so to say. After all, such a person doesn't even apprehend God, does he? And again, well, today is the day of Silouan. May his name live. Let's say, what did he write about? He exactly said that a person who lives an ordinary human life even starts regarding God as an opponent, right up to hating him. You see? Why? Because consciousness always hates the spiritual world. It is always in opposition. And it says, all this is nonsense. They are sectarians. They are all stupid. Or, look at those priests. They are swindlers. They simply take money from people. Why so? Because consciousness has no understanding of the spiritual world. Consciousness is mortal. And a phenomenon arises here. If consciousness is mortal, this means I'll die. You see? So, it turns out that actors on the stage force you, the viewer, to live their life. Got it? If they die, hence the viewer will die too. Well, the movie will simply be over, but life will remain. This is interesting.
I'd like to switch to the topic of personal experience. You know,
Personal experience. Well, today, we have talked a lot about cataclysms and everything else, about relations between people. Let me just interrupt you. I've recalled one thing. Once, a professor asked a ferryman to take him across a violent river. He was riding a boat and talking to the ferryman. The ferryman was a simple fellow and had a rough language. The professor said, "Oh, you are so illiterate. Do you know that you've lost half of your life because you haven't learned the language subtleties?" The ferryman looked at him and said, "Can you swim?" The professor said, "No, I can't." "Well, in such case, you have lost your entire life, for we are drowning."
Indeed, we seem to be living in such an advanced civilization, with such technologies. All of us are so educated and have acquired and developed so many various skills, while we actually aren't capable of the main thing, to love with the true spiritual love. After all, this is really what...
There's a subtlety here. There's true love, and there's love through consciousness. You see? Consciousness always copies. If we go deeper into physics, let's tease physicists a little bit. With our little septon. I mean, those who are not with us yet. Okay? There are reflections of the true light in distorting mirrors. So, what consciousness does is that it always creates distorted mirror images of the truth.
Yeah.
Why? Because it creates some love. It creates an illusion of respect. Yet what is this love based upon? On egoism and pride, of course. Whom do we love? The one who tells us fairy tales. Who is he telling those to? To our consciousness. We like or dislike something in this person, but if it's beneficial for us, and if he warbles fairy tales nicely, we love him. Do we love? Or is it just pleasant and convenient for us? This flatters our pride.
Comfort.
Comfort, right. And what is real love? It has nothing to do with the material world, right? That's the point. If people had at least a slight contact with real love, as many say, with Jesus' love, according to Christianity, we would have no animosity. Nobody would spit at each other's back, and nobody would deceive anyone.
This is really easy, in fact. Already on the spiritual path, there was such a pattern. You know, when you approach the spiritual world with the material brain, it's the pattern of not giving love to God, but...
Not giving, but taking.
Yes, and so...
That's normal.
To control, to intensify, not to vanish in this love and...
It's a mistake of many people stepping on the spiritual path and coming to any religion. People come in order to get. They come to get salvation of their soul. They don't even know what the soul is. They don't have experience, but they are told, which is exploitation again. Believe, do like this, act this way, believe. And what about mind? Mind always opposes everything. How can I believe if I don't know? Thus, vanity begins. Some people start repeating it as mantra. If it is said believe, hence I should believe, otherwise there will be something bad. And again, what is cultivated? Fear.
Fear, exactly. God-fearing.
God-fearing. Can a God-fearing person come to God? Let's just say, if I'm afraid of an elephant, I won't go to it. Why? Because it's an elephant, and I'm afraid of it, right? For example, if I'm afraid of you, I won't go to your place, for I'm afraid of you. There is already a barrier between God and a person. Or, there is another point. You are a slave of God. You are a slave of the system, a slave of the devil, if you live by consciousness. Here, you are a slave. Who among the prophets ever said that you are God's slave? As a spiritual being, they didn't say that. Everyone says equal, brothers, sisters, right?
Even in the spiritual approach, there is this point of slavery, that people as if need some instructions in order to...
Surely. Yet, people don't need instructions. They need a responsible person. Everybody wants one thing. Indeed, this is stereotypical. Everybody wants someone to take responsibility for them. I will live as I want. Again, I want. As my consciousness dictates to me. I will live by my patterns. Enjoy this life. And someone will be responsible for me. And this, unfortunately, gave rise to such a bad tool when some people exploit others on the basis of spirituality. Well, a simple example. Let's take Alatra again. It is rumored that some secret groups are opened here or there. They begin to study something super secret. They recruit people. Some of them get sick. Others become enlightened. Well, these are all fairy tales. What secrecy? Everything is actually open, right?
That's the point that...
Of course.
Indeed, the truth is so simple and it has always been conveyed in a simple language to all people.
Right. The point is that it is simple. I understand if the issues of service or something like that are raised. When a person is spiritually, let's say, free, but he wants to help others, then he needs some tools. However, it's already when a person is spiritually free, that's when he can serve and help. But when he is going himself, he can only share his experience of this path, not more. What is the secret here? The fact that he fell down here or there, he stumbled, so you don't fall. Is this a secret? Well, maybe. Although who knows what a person stumbled over?
The secret action of the system.
Of course.
Whom he disguises, whom he defends at that moment.
What attracts people? What attracts consciousness? Or rather, what does consciousness urge people to? To mystery, to some privacy. You will gain knowledge by which you can rule other people.
Under the pretext of helping them.
Certainly. A simple example. If we now start talking about some tools, okay? They really exist. I mean certain tools that will be very attractive for people. I'm not talking about extrasensory abilities. It's much more serious. That will attract a lot of people's attention. They will want it so much. Consciousness, again, who will urge them? Consciousness. But if a person is spiritually free, will this be interesting for him? What for? If he doesn't have a need in service, he won't need these tools at all, because he is with God. He's already there. You see? Well, here, there is activation. And again, we go back to our Silouan, whom we have mentioned more than once today. That matter isn't interesting for a spiritually free person. That's true. Right?
Right.
Yes, and he called this spiritual egoism. As a matter of fact, not he called it, but it was said before him. It's one of the good manifestations of egoism. In this case, the egoism is spiritual.
Again, everything is fractal, therefore spiritual egoism which...
Not fractal, but mirror.
Mirror.
Surely.
So it's in the system and in the spiritual world.
There's indeed spiritual egoism. Spiritual egoism is when a person has really gained perception of the spiritual world through feelings, and he already lives by it. The material world disappears for him. It doesn't disappear. The person lives actively. Even, what are we talking about? He continues to live among people, to have the same lifestyle. Just there is an understanding of why one person behaves this way and the other in another way. If someone tries to offend him, the one who offends gets offended. Because how can one be offended? Well, what if a dog has barked at me? Why would I be offended at it? Even if it bit me, it's just a dog. It should bite. It's actually a dog, right? So there is an understanding of what rules people. There is a regret, of course. There is a pity that a person loses what he could have gained, meaning a person could have gained life, but he is content with temporary existence. However, as a matter of fact, the spiritual egoism sort of really gives an understanding, but on the other hand, it removes some kind of regret about this lost world. Yet, in human understanding, again, for a person who lives by the material, this is scary. How can I lose these values? Values of the material world. I mean, but do you actually possess them? What do you possess? Okay, let's possess this cup. Well, any day, my body will be destroyed. Yours, a bit later. It's just that you are younger. That's why I put it in this order, purely from a human point of view.
Nobody knows.
Well, let's just imagine. So, if this cup isn't broken, somebody will get it. Will we possess it? A simple example.
Possess.
Possess. While the system exactly emphasizes possession, meaning submission of somebody to itself. And that's what people live by. That's what is valued. If we gave birth to children, we must subdue them. We must rule them and live their lives. Again, live their lives. They are free personalities. We may help them, but we may not force them. Yet if we impose anything, then we influence, and we face what?
Resistance.
Resistance. Why? Because, by and large, the devil is one, or the system is one. He has many demons. They report everything to him. Or let's take the system. Everyone has their own consciousness, but it's an integrated, let's say it's a part of a single whole. So there is nothing special here.
By the way, it would be good to expand on this topic a little bit. Unity in the spiritual sense and the system as a single organism. The fact that
Again, a mirror reflection. There used to be such an expression. Few people remember it. Well, it doesn't matter. It says, imagine that you have broken a mirror, and the smallest, the tiniest piece which reflects the sun is our material world. This crooked reflection of the sun in a broken mirror is the material world. Then it says, and how many worlds are there? Well, there are as many worlds as there are little pieces into which you can break a mirror. This is interesting. There was a saint who also tried to explain things to people in such little examples. And there is another interesting point. When many people ask to describe the spiritual world, like, what should I feel, and so on, well, first of all, who is asking this? It is consciousness asking, which will never perceive this, because a person who understands that he's just a viewer in this theater of absurdity would never ask such a question. He strives to learn this himself and puts an effort at least to this little light and a slight warmth inside, and he's gradually moving in that direction. Okay, let's go back to the parable. So there is an interesting parable about how to talk about the spiritual world with words. A man who desires to receive answers about the spiritual world comes to a sage and says, I know that you are a sage. They talk a lot about you. Tell me what the spiritual world is. The sage says, why would I tell you about this? Learn it yourself. It's a simple and interesting way, and it is noble. I want to know first, the man says. The sage replies, fine. He gets up and says, leaving. Wait, a certain time passes, and he comes back with a huge basket of bricks. He says, here are the bricks for you. By means of them, tell me what the air is. Once you succeed, come and I will explain to you.
So, this is so
A striking difference.
subtle.
Yes, but I like this answer. I enjoyed it. The only thing I don't like about this experiment is that it's not easy to carry a basket of bricks with you.
In order to explain what it is,
What the spiritual world is. To the one who is just curious, because the one who wants to learn just goes ahead, and nothing hinders him.
by the way, there is a point which is very important for me. You know, it's like with the mind, I always understood that God is inside. And so I really understood this just with the mind until once
We don't understand with the mind, we feel.
we heard, we knew.
We didn't hear and didn't know. All these are just words, but every person feels and realizes that he has a connection with the spiritual world. And this happens from a person's birth. Why? Starting from the 8th day, a person already becomes a human, because there is a part of the spiritual world in him, and he feels this connection. Even, let's say, the most inveterate skeptic, the most devout atheist, feels this anyway. And this makes many people who are free from imposed patterns, it makes them search for this spiritual path. Well, and here, of course, various paradoxes arise, but we'll talk about this a bit later. A person feels this, but not with the mind. It is exactly with the mind that he creates everything to deny these feelings. He creates various conclusions about why God doesn't exist, or what God is, or that we are created in His image. And here, we suggest that once life has appeared, aliens came and taught us something, and that we decided that they were God, because we were primitive people, right? So, in the image and likeness, this means we were created by aliens. This satisfies consciousness. Mind came and created mind. But regarding the fact that there is something different, that which created all matter and which is life itself, after all, if we remove what is called the Holy Spirit or God's manifestation, everything will disappear. You see? Thanks to this light inside of a septon, its mirrors reflect and create an illusion. They actually reflect the inner light. They create matter. If we take a look at what matter really is, matter is an illusion. But the denser this illusion is, the more material it becomes. And matter perceives matter as matter. Just note, even a dream. Let's take a simple thing, the work of the mind. In a dream, we feel everything is real. There is no difference for us between here and there. In rare cases, we realize that it's a dream, right? But apart from that, it's all real. Again, from the position of an observer or a viewer, we see this theater of actions. For us, solid is solid, material is material. We smell and taste things. For us, life passes absolutely realistically. The same illusion is here. How is it different? Well, I would say it differs in its duration. And it also differs radically by the fact that in this illusion, we have an opportunity to gain life. I wish every person at least tried, let's say, to observe himself. Just conducted an experiment, a mental experiment, and observed his consciousness, what it tells him against his desire, and how. Many people say, I have the will. Yet, just observe whether you actually have a will, human, and everything will fall into place. If every person devoted a little bit of time, at least 10 minutes a day, just out of an interest, with a pencil in his hand, can he stop a thought that has come to him? Can he control it? Can he think about one or another thing or change the course of events, the events in his head? And can he eventually give an honest answer to himself? Who are you?
And why are you here?
Well, he will understand why he's here only when he becomes a viewer. You see, an independent viewer in the theater of absurdity. But as long as he's involved in the process, which our consciousness creates for us on the stage of our so-called life, here, he will unlikely ask himself a question. Why is he here? In this case, consciousness will tell him why he's here, in order to consume, to be, and to dominate, not more than that, and to cheerfully pass this seemingly long way within a short period of time, and then a subpersonality. We approached the topic of subpersonality, but then digressed a little. Modern science already gives an understanding that subpersonality is an absolutely real state. Why? Because information doesn't disappear anywhere, and consciousness is nothing but an information bundle, let's say. It can only exist if it is fueled with energy. While attention is that very energy which feeds this information bundle. Well, this is so from the perspective of physics. Therefore, after the death of a physical body, the contact of personality with the source of this energy, with what we call the soul, practically doesn't end. The only thing is that the process of fusion is no longer possible. However, he continues to feed. This viewer continues to finance the actors who continue to show him the movie. And the person, having no body, having neither eyesight nor hearing, preserves everything he has. In order to understand what the state of subpersonality is, elementary practices would be suitable. You close your eyes, cover your ears, and forget about the body a little, while everything else remains. Emotions, desires, greed, egoism, and all the rest, as well as self-love, of course, and this is for many years.
So everything is absolutely the same as happening here.
Practically nothing changes for a person. That is why, when this after-death experience is described, the only issue arising relates to burning and everything. That's why there is hell there and things like that. Because, again, there are ordinary physical laws. I think, with God's help, in the nearest future, if everything is fine, science keeps developing, and the world goes on. I mean, generally speaking, if humanity is lucky, they will achieve such a level in the development of physics and science that this will be understandable and clear as elementary things, which science is today dealing with. If you don't gain life here and now, you won't gain it later either. I would put it this way. Therefore, perception of that world through feelings becomes natural when a person passes through this process of fusion. He just lives by that world. It is beautiful, interesting, and he really becomes a viewer already. But the one who understands that, yes, he paid 5 cents and he's watching this movie, but today he is watching it, while tomorrow there will be no movie. Meaning, this theatrical performance anymore. He is free. He's not attached to it. This is interesting. Well, something like that. Actually, I don't like to talk on the topic of subpersonalities and things like that. Because again, people's septonics, people's consciousness, starts using all this as a tool to enslave them even more.
To scare.
No, not to scare, but to enslave. What I mean is that it starts telling you, see, they are talking about some subpersonalities. This is not true. And with its so-called persuasions, beliefs, stories, and thoughts, which a person sort of controls, it pushes people as personalities farther and farther away from the spiritual world. Thus, it turns out that when we bring up such topics, we don't encourage and don't help people to gain a spiritual understanding, but we help consciousness to push people away, to alienate them from the spiritual world even more. That is, we strengthen consciousness's position in people. Yet, on the other hand, let's say for those who consider themselves atheists, for them it's good.
When you said that you don't like to talk on this topic, knowing how consciousness would react, an inner need immediately arose to talk on a different topic, on a topic inspiring for people who follow the spiritual path. It's the topic of spiritual experience.
Well, it's already interesting, let's say. This is what we can talk about. Even if somebody's consciousness considers that we are sitting and having fun, at least we are enjoying ourselves, unlike them. And we sort of have more prospects, meaning we will be able to chat and talk longer.
It would really be desirable to stand facing God and not the mirror, yes?
Like in the fairy tale, right? About Baba Yaga's hut.
And to discuss the topic which indeed interests a lot of people who have started their spiritual path and already have some experience of a contact with the spiritual world. It would be desirable to talk about living by the spiritual world.
We shouldn't talk about it. We should live by it. Another thing is to discuss the ways of gaining knowledge. Well, let's say there are many ways of getting to know the spiritual world, but the essence is one. That is, basically, there are no bad religions. In any religion, the truth is embedded, which can lead a person to God if the person wishes so. Therefore, I kind of don't see any secrets. I don't see any complications. Everything is open and accessible to people. Another thing is that there is no desire. Why? Because as we've already mentioned, consciousness never seeks God. Even if we take the issues of love, okay? Consciousness is unable to love. It doesn't have this function.
It doesn't know what love is.
It doesn't know what love is. It knows what comfort is. It knows what is acceptable or unacceptable for it. Well, as for a person's consciousness, but again, it's a consumerist point of view, isn't it? We have already discussed this more than once, even in relationships. Let's say, in families, in relationships with one another. It would be good if people really, so to say, having worked at least a little bit on themselves, understood at least a little bit what true love is. What that eternal, which is hidden in each of them is. Well, what can be more beautiful? It's what makes this existence, gives it a meaning, like what people are here for, in order to at least gain that love, the true one. But again, not in the meaning of love of one person for another, as of one material subject for another material subject through consciousness. Consciousness will create an illusion, which will disappear and collapse very quickly. As we have already said, the fairy tale ends with the wedding. Then reality begins. Some opportunistic or other motivations arise. But love is a convenience of existence. The most interesting thing is that sometimes you observe how one person has lost another, and he empathizes, Why does he empathize? Does he care for that person? For instance, he died. They have lived a whole life together, and he died. He actually cares about comfort, about convenience, about the object of manipulation, something else, or about him as a revenue source. But in no case about him as a spiritual being whom he was separated from. After all, if people are spiritually mature, again, we are returning to this, then such a problem as the death of a physical body will never separate them. And again, spiritual development gives not only this love, but also an understanding that everything is one. Separation exists only in the material world. Here, we are separate. We are molecularly separate, and so on, spatially separate. While in the spiritual world, everything is a little bit different. You should agree. It's difficult to tell and convey to people what this is. It's the same as describing the air with stones.
Air.
It's better to go through this. It's better to gain this experience yourself. Then it's more interesting, more worthy. Well, in any case, there is at least some meaning in this fleeting existence. People chase some sort of illusion in this world, but in the end, it disappears, and everything comes to nothing. And in the face of death, especially if a person had to live a long life, he starts comforting himself that he has built a house, has made children like Mr. Geppetto, maybe has planted a tree at best, and that's it. Yet, what is the meaning of his existence? What has he gained? What does he depart with? Apparently, with nothing, only with the pride for the fact that he was doing something for people, for his country, for whatever else. But who will remember that?
Only himself.
And who actually needs it? Well, consciousness comforts that you have lived your life not in vain. You have achieved something. But if we talk to any old person, if it's a heart-to-heart talk, they are always in sorrow, except for those who have attained God.
By the way, here we came to the topic of the feeling of joy. After all, each of us has experienced this feeling of infinite joy.
Joy may be different. There may be joy from consciousness, from acquisition of something, but it is fleeting. That's why the joy of unity with the spiritual world through feelings does not run out. It doesn't cease and doesn't bore. It cannot be boring. The point is that it is always there, and every instant is new. It's an affinity of new sensations and perceptions through feelings. So to say, it's a vibrant life. It is filled with life. A life filled with life. You cannot call it otherwise. While in the material world, there's a transitory illusion. Even when, for instance, hormones got activated or something else, like there's some surge in this material life, but it is necessarily replaced with some problem. It is replaced with sadness, disappointment, again with grudges, aspirations, some burdens, and distractions from true life. Well, isn't it so?
A person who's in God's love always feels joy. When I succeeded to feel this joy, there was an understanding that, as if I hadn't let myself feel this before, meaning there had been some absolutely ephemeral boundaries and distractions.
Consciousness always sets boundaries. It always doesn't let a person there. Why? Because this differs strikingly. A person who has really felt at least once what God or the spiritual world is, this is impossible to forget, impossible to compare to anything. Why? Because it is real. It is here and now. And this now isn't stretched in time, meaning it's just there because it is there and because it is true. It is there. It is so various. I would say not various, but multifarious, that even eternity isn't enough to live through all this multifariousness. But this multifariousness is always filled with happiness.
And also, there is such an interesting point that, indeed, being in the spiritual world is never monotonous. That when you come in contact with the spiritual world, you understand that in the spiritual, not a single instant is repeated, that every contact is totally new. And to be honest, there are moments when consciousness flies in and says, "So what? Is this really so simple? Is there really no need to generate warmth anywhere or strengthen anything? Or you just need to..."
Just to be.
Just to be in these states.
These are not states. This is life. You need just to be and just to live. And note, even the slightest, the quietest appeal of personality to that world immediately connects with it. And it instantly gives a full range of indescribable feelings of that world. But the most interesting thing is that no matter how much and how loud a person yells in this world, from the mind, so to say, from his consciousness, that he wants to get to know the world of God or seeks Him, except for some molecular shaking of the air, he will cause nothing. Right?
So even the quietest appeal.
Of course. And here, people often make mistakes. For many, they are indeed disastrous because they try to perceive the spiritual world by means of consciousness. You see, as if they conduct some scientific experiment, try to estimate it. They require some sort of proof. We have already talked about it more than once, that they can see the proof in a mirror. The point is different. The point is that consciousness always drives personality into a deadlock. It attempts to corner him and cause a storm of emotions in order to attract personality's attention to its stage scene on the theatrical stage. What does it do this for? In order to actually distract a person from learning that truth, because a striking difference occurs. An enormous gap forms between that world and this world, over which you just don't want to go back. This is simply unreal. It certainly happens that a person, as you say, while being, let's say, and even having a spiritual experience, he still uses consciousness as a tool. And having got carried away by trivial three-dimensional issues of, so to say, this life in the material world, he can naturally catch himself at thinking that he started giving the power of his attention not to the spiritual world, but to matter. So he gets immersed in this game, becomes not just a viewer of a theatrical performance, but its participant. Well, this happens. This is normal. I wanted to share an example, precisely showing that no matter how much you yell here, you won't come closer by means of consciousness. Some guys whom I know, well, I met them a bit later. They felt, just like many people feel, that all this, meaning this world sort of isn't right, that there is spiritual world, and so on. Obviously, they went to many places, tried to find it. They read plenty of literature, traveled half the world in search of gurus and mentors, but they didn't feel any satisfaction or change. Interestingly, they even went for climbing a very high mountain, risking everything, just in order to be closer to God. I asked them, so what? I say, you approached God, climbed to the top. Many say that God is there, right? Well, while we were climbing, they say, we were swearing like troopers along the whole way. When we came up there was no air, although we climbed there to meditate, to sit there, since it's closer to space, so to say, since God is there, according to various Eastern traditions. I ask, so, did you meditate? They say, how to put this? It was terribly cold, and there was no air to breathe. What meditation are we talking about? Consciousness revolted. They say, and we understood perfectly well that it's going to be even harder to descend. Here's such an interesting life story about how people were trying. I have told this because many people search. Again, who forces them? Consciousness manipulates them. It says, there is a holy place there. Go there, do this and that. They go from consciousness. They go on a pilgrimage. They go to holy places. They perform various pilgrimages, seemingly extremely hard for a human. for their physical bodies, but they return the same as they left. Through consciousness, through physical actions of one's own body, it's impossible to get to know the spiritual world.
Even if someone managed to get inspired, for how long is that?
Of course, and I already talked about this in another program, about the words of Muhammad, that Allah is much closer than the carotid artery. He's in you. You just need to open up. Nothing is required. You don't need to run anywhere.
Just to be.
You just need to be. You simply need to be. Simply need to learn. It's not difficult. It's so simple that consciousness actually cannot learn this. That's why it is indignant. And who reviles at God in a person? Consciousness. What for? For personality to be its slave, for him to be an eternal viewer who diligently pays for its show. And what does he pay with? With an opportunity of life, of gaining life, because that power which is in a person, in personality, he should direct mainly, let's say 90 to 10, to gain his life, true life. But what does he waste it on? On a show, on an illusion. Isn't it so? It is. We as emotional beings, we live, we care about all sorts of trifles. A hamster has died. It's a tragedy. I'm not saying that a hamster dying is not a tragedy. It's a tragedy, of course, but this is natural. However, when a child cries rivers because he is sorry about a hamster that died, his parents, instead of explaining what matter is and what life is, instead of approaching this issue correctly, that a hamster is a soulless creature, it's not a human. Instead of that, they tell him that it's fine, the hamster's in heaven, it will wait for him. That's what I'm talking about. These are patterns, everything through consciousness.
Why does a spiritual person need consciousness at all? Just to reach, to realize, and to be?
What do you mean? Wait a minute. I disagree with you. A person needs consciousness for communication in three-dimensionality. After all, when a person is at the level of feelings, this world disappears for him. And this is really so. You can disbelieve me or my words, be my guest, but there's the experience through which all saints passed. The experience which was brought here by the prophets. If a person considers himself a believer, then not believing his prophet is somehow stupid, isn't it? It is just wrong. Each of them actually said that when gaining exactly this state of perception through feelings, you lose this world. Why? Because when you are there, this world becomes an absolute illusion, and you don't want anything in it. You don't want to exist in it at all. Nobody wants to go from good into bad. But it's exactly the phenomenon of our consciousness, that by having studied it, we can communicate in this world, meaning we live, work, and control our body by means of our consciousness. And we must stay here for as long as we are assigned. This is the law. It is one for everyone. At that, how would we communicate? I'm not saying with you. I'm saying with people, right? They wouldn't understand us. A self-satisfied girl is sitting and smiling, and they wouldn't understand anything else, you see? They would say, you are a fanatic, a sectarian, you are mistaken. They don't feel what's inside of you. And this is the problem, because consciousness is deaf and blind towards the spiritual world. It sees only a picture, an illusion, and that's it. Whereas those people who possess truly spiritual people don't need our picture, you see? We would sit and be silent for a while, and they would understand much more than you and I are talking about.
These communications are not needed, as it turns out.
Of course, because speaking human language, the spiritual world may be explained as a unified field, where everything is united. After all, there are no problems with feeling each other, right?
Right.
That is, I'm not saying emotion. Emotion is here, while there are feelings. All these feelings are interconnected. That's why there is such multifariousness of the spiritual world, while in this world, everything is separated. Here, all people are a mystery for each other. From this originates psychology and other diverse sciences. We try to understand each other. We study all sorts of various techniques of influence, the so-called NLP, or something else, in order to endow our words with more power, right? While in the spiritual world, this isn't needed. It is there, and it is endless. And there, everything is simple. Whereas here, everything is exactly the opposite. Absolutely everything is complicated, and everything is extremely divided. Divide and rule. Although, on the other hand, as we have already mentioned, it is divided only for the viewer, while actors are all united among themselves. That's exactly the paradox.
I would like to ask, people describe a state when you sit in peace, but then fall asleep.
I see. So, the question, as I've understood, is that when a person starts doing a spiritual practice, he simply falls asleep.
Yes,
In such cases, a person is not doing a spiritual practice, you see? He's just trying to do something with the mind. And naturally, what is the first thing happening? It is relaxation of the body, disconnection from the body, right? Thus, we go through meditations, approaching spiritual practice. Well, that's how it should be. When we do this with the mind, as soon as we have relaxed the body and got rid of thoughts, we honestly fall asleep, right?
right.
Exactly. And what is spiritual practice? Spiritual practice is not necessarily sitting in the lotus or some other complicated position, somewhere on the top of a mountain, repeating some mantra, and waiting until manna falls down from heaven. Spiritual practice is done in any place, always and everywhere. It must be done everywhere and always. It is perception of the spiritual world through feelings. It is putting the power of personality's attention into that good, that endless, which is inside of you. Meaning, into the spiritual world, into the very source of life. And any person can feel it. Any person can find it.
Igniting and residing.
Everything is simple. The moment you have come into contact with it, the more attention you invest, the closer you become to it. Thus, you redistribute this power, the power of life, exactly in order to gain this life. Naturally, a response takes place. And there happens what then happens.
I would also like to say that in this state, you actually don't want to sleep.
It's just impossible to fall asleep. It's the body that is sleeping, and consciousness is sleeping. Whereas, well, let's say, angels don't sleep. They don't need to. Consciousness sleeps. And it must sleep, right? Because what happens? Why does sleep occur? A disconnection takes place. I explained this in one of the programs. This is normal, natural, and necessary. While in the spiritual world, there is no notion of sleep, because there are no bodies and no problems. This function is just not needed.
When a person falls asleep, does this mean he simply was with consciousness?
Certainly, he's trying to perform spiritual practice by means of his consciousness. This is a paradox. It's impossible to come closer to the spiritual world with consciousness. It's unrealistic. It's the same as if we, pardon me for such an expression, take a demon and squeeze him into heaven. Just how? You see, it's impossible. It's possible to squeeze a saint into hell, but that would be just an excursion, nothing more. And even those cauldrons are nothing, just something similar to a sauna.
Igor Mikhailovich, tell us please, what does the first step to God begin with?
The first step to God? I would say with honesty. With honesty with oneself. It's when a person asks himself, who am I? Honestly. And starts to see what he is for. Is he just a combination of various molecules? And everything else, such a complicated machine. And what is it needed for? When he starts asking again, why am I here? What for? And who am I? From this first question, who am I? The path to God exactly begins. Or, on the contrary, in the opposite direction, depending on which answer he chooses for himself and who controls him at that time.
Responsibility. It would also be good to reveal the topic of responsibility. Having realized and understood who I am,
Responsibility may be different. If we take responsibility for ourselves, for our life, this is not a reason for the way to God, you see? Responsibility is, again, more a material thing. It is closer to consciousness. How is it? Responsibility of personality for what? For consciousness, or responsibility that is in consciousness for the spiritual world? The spiritual being, as we have said, when a person gains an understanding of the reality of God's world, he has a contact. He lives by that world. He loses values here, but he retains responsibility for his relatives and close people. Why have we returned to the topic of family again? Why wouldn't a person provoke a divorce or something else? He wouldn't offend anyone in his family. On the contrary, he would adjust to them and help, and he would bring nothing but good and positive into the family. If he brings quarrels, conflicts, it's already from the mind. He has decided for himself that he is spiritual, but he doesn't live by the spiritual world, and here conflicts begin. You see? I understand this kind of responsibility, but the responsibility for oneself? A question arises, whose responsibility? Of the viewer or the actors on the stage? True responsibility is gained only when a person gains an understanding, at least an understanding that the spiritual world is real. You see? When he gains the first experience, that's when responsibility arises in him, a true spiritual responsibility at least for his own self. Let's put it this way. However, there is another option. There is another responsibility. When a person has not simply understood, but he gains an excessive feeling of responsibility for other people, and he can help others, then it's already service. Well, this is certainly a very valuable quality, but it's already another stage. Not many people are actually endowed with such an enhanced responsibility. Sort of, if you have saved yourself, help others. Yet, in our case, there is more often a responsibility from the mind. We haven't saved ourselves, but we teach and tell others, you got up with the wrong foot, you didn't do push-ups right, well, or something else. So people like to teach, not being, let's say, themselves, not having their own experience, but to advise others on how to gain experience. Well, what can we do? The system is the system.
spiritual love is a giving love. Surely you feel this unbelievable love from the spiritual world, and a need, a desire to give all of you, to express this love.
And it cannot be otherwise, because as you are saying, to give all of you, because a person totally belongs to the spiritual world in fact. But here comes an understanding that not simply to give, but also to even force your body to serve the spiritual world here, and to force your consciousness exactly to obey you, and to do what the spiritual world needs. No, not people, not some organizations or whatever else, but the spiritual world. That is, there is a process of defending the spiritual world in this material world, and sort of increasing of chances for other people to get to know that world. But this is already the process of service. Well, not everyone is endowed with this, unfortunately. Even those who follow the spiritual path and learn. Most often, trivial spiritual egoism works, and a person simply, after all, he feels good. But this is also very important. This cannot be judged. Why? Because the value of this world disappears. And for a person who has gained spiritual experience, this world sort of becomes secondary. Whereas some people, on the contrary, also gain the highest understanding of responsibility, spiritual responsibility, not only for their near and dear ones, but for other people as well. because they understand that spiritually we are all one. It's one world, and people are in delusion from their consciousness. Demons whisper, as it is said, right? So, they try to help them learn, understand this world. Well, something like this. This is service.
I'd like to address the concealed and innermost subject, the superior service, Maria's service, what the true feat consists
Superior
in.
service. Well, Maria's true feat exactly consisted in what we have mentioned, in her service to people. She not only herself perceived, but also gives others an opportunity to perceive, and takes care of people. And just note how people revere her in various countries, and not just revere, but truly feel her active assistance in spiritual matters.
The protecting veil of the Mother of God.
The protecting veil of the Mother of God. Of course, it's the power coming from her and helping people to open up. Well, it's the highest degree of service to the spiritual world.
She achieved this following the same way as everyone.
Certainly. However, not everyone can do as she did. Although, let's say, nothing prevents any person from knowing what she got to know and unfolding in such a way. Well, Maria is Maria. At that, we can digress from questions and conduct a little experiment.
Okay.
Now we have talked about experience, the first steps, something else, right? So let's just sit silently for a while. And those who want, those who don't want, will turn off the video and will not watch. They won't do anything. Whereas those who really want to see what consciousness is, what perception through feelings is, those who can feel, those will feel and understand and won't ask any questions. One who hasn't developed this ability yet will at least observe his consciousness for a while, already, as a viewer. He will really observe what his consciousness is telling him already, as an actor. And why it is telling this. Let it revile. Consciousness of very many people will revile at us now, and this is normal. But for many, this will give an understanding that they are viewers. They don't want to wish us ill, while consciousness will speak badly of us. Well, thank God, since it's actually their problem, right? A problem with consciousness, but this will help many people, those who want to learn. Let's just sit silently for a while.
Let's do it.
An interesting experiment. A really funny one. They will say they have nothing to talk about, so they decided to be silent and record such a video. Just kidding. Of course, consciousness wasn't talking about us in such a peaceful way. And it's interesting that people are like open books. When you can read, everything is stereotypical. And do you know what the most interesting thing is? That it feels really joyful for those who have felt it. And there is absolutely no pity for the consciousness of those people who were even very tough to us. I guess they will express their attitude, some of them. But the main point is that it's for the benefit.
Thank you very much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Not at all. Don't thank me. I'm just a human. Right? Wish you all the best.